This is a prelude to my previously released readings from the novel of the film Shadowlands by Leonore Fleischer. In the following scenes, C.S. Lewis, also known as Jack, encounters the rebellious student Peter Whistler for the first time in his romantic poetry class. A garden, enclosed by a high wall. Inside the garden, a fountain. In the fountain, 2 crystal stones. Jack Lewis's bright blue eyes sent forth beams of sapphire light as he warmed to his subject. When he spoke, in the magic spell cast by his cultured voice and the gestures of his fine hands, one could almost see the enchanted walled garden he was describing. In the crystals, in reflection, a rose garden. In the midst of the roses, one perfect rosebud. Guillaume Dolores is using the rosebud as an image, of course. But an image of what? Lewis threw the challenge out into the room, his voice reverberating with drama. A handful of youthful faces looked back into his, the undergraduates who were reading the allegorical Romance of the Rose in C.S. Lewis's lectures in courtly poetry. Professor Lewis himself was the acclaimed author of a standard work on the subject, The Allegory of Love, a study in medieval tradition, which was, of course, required reading for this term. Love? Suggested Montrose Frith, who was usually the first to answer. Love, nodded Lewis. But what kind of love? Untouched? Unopened? Like a bud? Daviff Standish's brow wrinkled as he voiced the concept. Perfect love? Asked Frith tentatively. What makes it perfect? Lewis demanded. Is it the courtly ideal of love? Asked Alexander Leven slowly. Yes, but what's that? What's its one essential quality? C.S. Lewis looked around the book-lined room at his students, daring them to think, to envisage, to dream the courtly dream, to immerse themselves in the rich and complex meanings of the poetry. His fondest hope was that he could get through to his students, to get them to unravel the puzzle of life, to make an impact on their thinking about life and love. The young men sat silently, staring back at their Don, waiting for him to tell them, and he did so, with a flair that was almost theatrical. Unattainability. The most intense joy lies not in the having, but in the desiring. The delight that never fades, the bliss that is eternal, is only yours when what you most desire is just out of your reach. Grasp it and you've lost it. Pluck the rosebud and it dies. He looked keenly at his students to discern how they accepted this concept of non-consummation, a concept alien to healthy young men in their sexual prime. Peter Whistler gave a little snort under his breath, his eyes averted. He was the class cynic, contemptuous of everything. What was that, Mr. Whistler? Pounced Lewis. Nothing, Mr. Lewis, muttered the sullen Whistler. If you disagree with me, say so. Fight me, I can take it, smiled Lewis. He waited for a response, but none was forthcoming. Whistler would not take up the gauntlet. He preferred to slouch further down in his chair and sulk. Even I can't fight on both sides at once, you know, said Lewis. That is, I can, but I am liable to win. The students laughed sycophantically, except for Whistler, who regarded Lewis levelly. His poetry tutorials continued with the same group of students, Frith, Standish, Leven, and, of course, the rebel pupil Whistler, who today appeared to be sound asleep in his chair. Character and plot. Chicken and egg. Which comes first? Asked Professor Lewis, brandishing a copy of Aristotle's Poetics. He stopped, as though expecting an intelligent answer, but his students, well trained by now, waited obediently to hear it from the horse's mouth. Aristotle's solution was simple and radical. He said, plot is character. Forget psychology. Forge the inside of men's heads. Read them by their actions. Lewis turned to look hard at Whistler, and his class did the same. For example, Mr. Whistler is asleep, he continued. From that action, I know that he has no interest in what I have to say. The puzzle is, that being the case, why is he here at all? So we construct a plot from Mr. Whistler's actions. He comes, he sleeps. Aristotle would say that the next question is not why, but what will Mr. Whistler do next? Then, as though the eyes staring at him had a physical impact on him, Peter Whistler opened his own eyes. Seeing everybody staring, his cheeks turned a dull red. "My classes are not compulsory, Mr. Whistler," said Lewis in an affable voice, although he was genuinely offended. "Nor are my chairs very comfortable. I suggest—" Pulling himself up out of his chair, the rebellious Whistler gathered up his notebooks, his text, and his jacket. The embarrassed expression on his face was now replaced by its usual look of sullenness. "All right, I'm going." He left the room, closing the door behind him with a bang. Lewis turned back to his class and shrugged broadly. He comes, he sleeps, he goes. The plot thickens.